And welcome everyone to the May edition of This Month in Cyber. Hope you enjoyed your Memorial Day weekend, and bless and thanks to those for who the day is dedicated. We've been doing this for about 4 years now, month in and month out. Try to talk to our customers about a good way to stay on top of stories that have occurred in the news and kind of things that we might be reading about, and just want to figure out how those are related to protecting ourselves as small and medium businesses. We always start each webinar, as you probably know, if you've attended them before, with a cybersecurity framework, because you can kind of get lost when you're talking about security. And so we try to put things into buckets where we can. We usually prefer this is the same sort of graphic. Identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover as part of are the main pillars of the cybersecurity framework. I like this because it kind of gives equal weighting to prevention and reaction, and that will be certainly true this month as we talk through a few stories for the month. In terms of stories, we're going to do things just a little bit different this week also. We certainly have some stories to talk about. We're going to kind of bucketize them. There's almost too much going on in the security world, so we're really going to put these into three major stories. The first one is about Office 365 being under attack. And as such, there's some stories that come out from the Department of Homeland Security, as well as some discussions about something called the China Chopper, which is impacting SharePoint implementations, and there's discussions about account takeovers. The second series of stories is going to be about patching processes and effectively some things that have come out from our friends at Intel, as well as our friends at Cisco, as well as, of course, our friends at Microsoft. And the last set of stories is around ransomware. And specifically, we're going to share two stories. One particularly, it's around the city of Baltimore. For those who aren't aware of their situation today, we'll get you up to date. And also, we're going to be discussing some folks that we're aware of. We'll just leave it at that. So without further ado, we kind of three major stories this week, or three major topics, and we'll give you some evidence as we kind of walk through. But let's get started. This one's going to be a little bit the other thing we're going to do a little differently today is we're going to ask you to self-assess. Okay, these results aren't going to be shared, but get out a scratch sheet of paper or otherwise. I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and we're going to have you give yourself points. At the end of the day, you want the points, right? You want 5 points if possible, because I'm going to ask you 5 questions. Again, we're not going to share these. If you get 5 points, congrats to you. If you get 4, you're probably in a low-risk situation. If you get 1, 2, or 3, or you're just not sure of the answers, you may want to look into it and/or potentially give us a call. This first one is around the topic of ransomware-ready. Okay, and so we're going to talk about. I'm going to advance this. Okay, give yourself a point if your organization checks backup jobs, success or failures daily, and if they failed, obviously you're restarting jobs. Give yourself a point if that's true. Give yourself a point if your organization performs a restore of a file at least every quarter. Give yourself a point if your organization performs a restore of a full system every quarter. Okay, not just a file, but the full system. Kind of more maybe what you might consider a DR test, but this is probably what they'd call a component test, as it's just part of your DR recovery. Give yourself a point if you know the latest version of your backup software and either it's installed or you know why it's not installed. There's sometimes some cases why you don't want to be on the latest version and or it's already been planned. Give yourself a point if within 1 business day you could produce the software and license key for your backup, an off-site copy of your data and systems, and the procedures and or admin level knowledge. Again, it's just kind of level set and kind of look inside and see how your backup is going as we kind of talk about some stories here. So the city of Baltimore was impacted in early May with something called a Robinhood ransomware. Okay, Robinhood ransomware impacted about 10,000 systems on their behalf. Okay, this would be workstations, servers of all kinds. It targeted files on a single system. It actually, the Robinhood ransomware, which is relatively known in the industry, was modified. So this was a variant to actually propagate because it had no propagation mechanism. But basically somebody had gotten admin access. This code effectively goes through 181 shutdown commands to try and make a lot of noise in log and event management, which either they didn't have or those systems were turned off. And long story short is, within a very short time frame, let's say less than 24 hours, they had a lot of systems being impacted. And you can kind of see the date. I've got it circled down there. That was May 7th, when the city of Baltimore suddenly was not able to provide services. All the employees were locked out of their email accounts, and the citizens are unable to access essential services, including websites, pay their water bills, property taxes, and parking tickets. Okay, Baltimore is not a small city. Now, this is also a city that prides itself on its technology usage. They are very up to date. They've got a decent spend, and they're essentially, when this ransomware hit, they were asked to pay 13 bitcoins, which in today's dollars is around $100,000. They decided not to do it, and instead they're going through, obviously the FBI is doing some investigation with them, but the update from the mayor as of Friday, right prior to this weekend, is the following. I won't read it to you, since we're all qualified at the reading, but we're a month in, okay, and a number of their systems are still going to take a couple more months to recover, and some of the services are not back up. So the cost of the outage is significant, and the city of Baltimore, very similar. I think the city of Greenville, South Carolina, was also hit kind of around the same time frame. These happen to be some notable stories that are out there, but ransomware is there. And I guess the one thing I wanted to bring forward is, in some of my readings, I'm finding, and this is specifically on some internet security reports of the industry as a whole, ransomware actually, where some people are seeing it down, overall the ransomware is down. But what's happened between 2017 and last year, 2018, is it moved from being a consumer-based to now being focused on enterprises. And so within enterprises, it's actually up 12% year over year, and ransomware is sort of on the rise as they go after people might have more dollars, more files that are being impacted. So don't think that ransomware is going away to for things like crypto mining and some of the other things we've discussed on here. It's still around. Furthermore, we're certainly aware of a situation where someone we know was impacted by ransomware also. This occurred a little while ago, and we're still in a recovery situation where there's been, a significant cost in terms of effort to, from a forensics perspective, to understand what occurred, from a recovery and rebuilding process, to kind of get them back to square. And that square still means that, they still have presumably some systems to upgrade. Just the regular maintenance that goes into environments is still impacting things. So so some things and some learnings I guess we'd take from this situation are, obviously always look at your cybersecurity insurance policy. Take a look at what protections you have in place to prevent this from occurring in the first place. And furthermore, if you answered low in the questions that I had asked earlier about your recovery system, if you feel like you're at risk from a recovery perspective, those are some areas that recovery is the number one response, if you will, for ransomware attacks. So I kind of put this forward to, from a prevention perspective, we kind of look at it three ways. Okay, there's people, process, and technology that can be brought to the table to prevent ransomware from occurring for you. On the people side, train your people. Okay, you train them, you test them, you do the best you can. It's an imperfect science, after all. We are people, but certainly you should have a regimented item in place. On the process perspective, patching, right? Get your patches on there. Have a documented process for how you do it, and that is your entire patch management routine. Equally, obviously, your antivirus management and things like that are very important. In the technology space, there are certainly some technologies. Nothing's a silver bullet, but we call it block it at the door, right? The Microsoft ATP or Mimecast or other email hygiene that's ready for variant attachments, right? Remember that even Baltimore was a variant. So most antivirus scanners aren't going to catch variants. They're called zero-day threats, or they're modifications of what's known through signatures. So you need a modern front door like ATP. And remember that mail is about 70% of where ransomware or other malware can enter into your network. So it's great to block the front door. There's still other ways things can get in, but if you don't block the front door, you're doing a disservice. But ultimately, you'll see we also have Cisco Umbrella listed there as a technology to kind of cover if people, process, and technology fail. Umbrella means any web request that's going out there is going out through DNS, and it's saying, where is this server, and so on and so forth. Cisco Umbrella is a managed DNS, meaning it's looking at where you're trying to go and saying, you know what, you really shouldn't be going there, and it will block you, or it will at least monitor the fact that you've gone there in most cases if it's unsure. And so by doing so, it's kind of like I'll call it the final protection for you. All of these solutions being said, it's a lot sometimes for an organization to take on by themselves. We have a service for doing all the technologies that are mentioned there called Complete Managed End User, and certainly can get you out of the responsibility for protecting yourself and kind of share some of that responsibility with someone who does it day in and day out for our customers. All right, the last part I'd mention is just with regards to backup. Again, if you had asked if you were in a risk situation with regards to your backup, know that backups can properly managed. You should be looking at daily backup jobs. You should be looking at things that need to be rerun, or how do we fix this problem with a file in use or a database that's not behaving correctly. You should be doing recovery tests. You should be getting some assistance if you need to in terms of failovers and making sure that those go well. And we certainly have a managed service for that is relatively low cost. All right, let's move on to our next topic. We're going to talk about patching. Never the most exciting topic, but this was certainly a dangerous month, if you will, and so I want to broaden the conversation a little bit, and let's start with a self-assessment. Again, check out a scratch paper. We're not sharing these results, but give yourself a point. If your organization has a repeatable patch process that you could document to a calendar, meaning on the 17th, you might say, oh, you know what? I'm 1 week into how I've been patching my servers, and I'm 1 week out yet from patching my workstations, and I'm not going to patch my routers or switches, and we'll jump into that with kind of point number 2. You should be able to document everything to a calendar. Secondly, you should have a plan for getting to Windows 10 by January 14th. I put that under the patch window because ultimately you know that patches aren't going to be released for anything but Windows 10, and in fact only certain versions of Windows 10 starting on January 14th. So certainly that should be of your mindset, having a plan. Give yourself a point if your organization patches firewalls and switches, wireless access points. Give yourself a point if plans are in place for eliminating Windows Server 2008, SQL 2008. By that same date of January 14th. And give yourself a point if you run automated vulnerability scans on your devices at least annually. Sometimes those vulnerability scans can point out gaps maybe in your patching. Hey, did you know I see these vulnerabilities? And it's usually because you don't have a patch installed. So just kind of a little self-assessment. Again, if you're at 5, you're good. 4, a little bit of risk. 1, 2, or 3 are not sure. Probably need some assistance, and might be a warning call for you. Let's talk about a couple stories here quickly in terms of the patching process. Intel, that's right, the chip maker, announced that they've got a problem, and I can imagine that you have a little bit of Intel in your environment. They announced that all operating systems running on top of the machines, whether they be Mac, Windows, or Chrome OS, with an Intel processor made since 2011, so that's just about everybody, could be subject to something called zombie load. Which is kind of a cool name. I probably should have put a graphic up here with a zombie, but basically high amounts of data where the processor can't properly deal with it, can expose the data that the processor is being, is going through the processor. And that data could be customer data. It could be passwords, encryption keys, and so forth that could be stolen directly from the processor. In terms of Windows OSs that are impacted, specifically this impacts XP and Windows 10. I'm sorry, XP and Windows 7, which is still, ironically, about 40% of the marketplace. So if you're still on an older operating system, Windows 8 is not impacted, and Windows 10 was already resolved. So, but what we're finding out there is you still have some industrial control systems and even some nuclear reactors, from what I was reading, still run some of those legacy OSs. Microsoft found it critical enough that they actually released a patch for XP, which they haven't done except in one case, and that was for WannaCry several years ago. So Microsoft's quote was saying, any future malware that exploits this vulnerability could propagate from vulnerable computer to vulnerable computer in a similar way as the WannaCry malware spread across the globe in 2017. That's a direct quote from the Microsoft's Director of Incident Response. So this is certainly an important one, and get those patches installed. Ironically, a lot of people just think of workstations and servers, and oftentimes you don't think of your infrastructure equipment, which is equally critical. Cisco had a release of 41 security advisories on Wednesday. Okay. That was from 5/2, so earlier this month. 41 in a single day. It was their largest ever. And more specifically, they've disclosed 488 security advisories for its equipment and services during the last year. They have a lot of equipment, and you don't own all of their equipment, but likely you've been impacted. Specifically, there were 22 high-impact advisories, and that included their phones, their firewall, threat defense software, security software, and so forth. So a fair amount of things happening there. And just ask you to think about your infrastructure, whether it be Cisco, HP, Juniper. Infrastructure and wireless access points need to be considered as part of your patch management program. Microsoft, right, they have their Patch Tuesday. Everyone's aware of it this month. No really worse or better than previous months. Obviously, you just had to kind of throw this in there. This particular month, there were 80 vulnerabilities, or 79, 22 critical, 55 important, 1 moderate, and a couple advisories. In terms of the ones that were critical, we're seeing a lot of system takeover ones, and certainly important, and hopefully you have a service level agreement to get that patches onto your critical devices in a very short, sub 30-day time frame. If not, give us a call. We've got processes we leverage for about 2,000 systems at this point: servers, workstations, infrastructure devices, access points, databases, and so forth. And the fact is, we likely patch more systems in a month than most organizations are going to do in a year. We're doing this repetitively. We've got good process for reporting, for patching, triage, knowing which patches are bad, monitoring, alerting, and even supporting if one of the patches needs to be rolled off. We do this, for in the server basis, we can take over complete responsibility at about $100 per server per month for the first 5, and about $50 a server after that. So it's not very expensive to kind of roll off the entire responsibility for the server, including antivirus and patching. And if you're in a risk situation, you might consider it. All right, let's wrap up into the third area, which is Office 365 is under attack. Many of you might be on Office 365. Within our customer base, we're certainly over 50%. So if you're not, great. Actually, one of these items still impacts you because we'll be talking about SharePoint. But again, 5 points is what you're kind of shooting for. Give yourself a point if you have Office 365 logging turned on. This is not turned on by default. Microsoft, in their wisdom, just turned it on by default in a tenant that was spun up in the last 4 or 5 months. So if your tenant was spun up before that, it's not turned on. And unless you consciously turn it on, which they're trying to bring that out to the portal now and literally put it in your face saying, turn this on, right? But it's not turned on by default. So if you don't remember turning it on, don't assume that it is. And I would answer no in that case if you're not consciously aware of that. Give yourself a point if your MFA is turned on for your Office 365 administrators. It's been available for, I don't know, 2 or 3, 4 years as a service. It's been highly recommended. The Secure Score, it's the top recommendation to do. In organizations we look at, it's usually still not done. Give yourself a point if it is. Give yourself a point if POP3 and IMAP are removed from all mailboxes. It's a little bit obscure, but these are some services that really haven't been used since, I don't know, the early 90s. POP3 and IMAP, maybe late 90s in some cases, but it's been a long time since those services have been used, and yet they're turned on by default and still are turned on by default if you spun up a tenant today. So if you don't consciously remember removing them, either through the GUI and doing a lot of clicks or with a PowerShell command, that certainly would be, don't click give yourself a point if you're not aware of doing it. Number 4, mailbox auditing turned on. This is separate and distinct from Office 365 logging. Mailbox auditing is much more verbose. It talks about, logging when people send messages or when someone, which people do a lot per day. Also, when you move mailboxes to or move data to a folder, a lot of that is innocuous activity. But how about when people become delegates of your mailbox, or when you turn on mailbox forwarding, or when someone's logging onto your mailbox from a different country than you're home to? Okay, all of those are only available if you have mailbox auditing turned on. So with that last point, do you evaluate logins from non-homed countries on a daily basis? Are you looking at those logs and saying, who's logging onto my mailboxes? All of these are good questions designed to do 2 things. A, just kind of make you aware of some things that you should be doing. And B, help you assess, some services that even the Department of Homeland Security here is recommending. So they came out with an analysis report on May 13th, as you can see there. And they had some security observations. If I was to read them to you, or if you were to go to that link in the bottom right when you get the PDF, you'll see that some of those observations say, hey, you know what? Office 365 logging should be enabled. Hey, you know what? I won't read you the rest, but they basically are saying exactly the questions that we had asked earlier. We've been asking these questions of our customers and peering in on environments for about 12 to 18 months right now. We've got a service specifically designed to help customers that don't have the time or bandwidth or knowledge to do some of these things. So we were glad to get validated, but in fact, we feel that their list was kind of short. Right? They pointed out five or eight things that needed to be done. And we believe more strongly that there's more things to be done, right? We should be looking not only at foreign mailbox logins, but also looking at mailbox forwarding. Who's doing forwarding within your organization? Where are they forwarding to? And was it on purpose, or was someone logging in and doing forwarding off to a third service? We've been talking about IMAP and POP for a year. How about mailboxes that are deleted, but the data is still there, no longer have an owner? So we'll call it isolated mailboxes. How about delegate access, right? Who's got delegate access to your mailbox? And we also believe strongly in the idea of turning on auditing for mailboxes. So we've got a list of about 45 things that we look at on a security review for Office 365 as part of our solution. We also look at things on a daily basis in terms of foreign mailbox logins. So certainly something that we felt happy to be validated with, but felt that the Department of Homeland Security was being a little, was just kind of scratching the surface. This next one's interesting. It's called Office 365 Under Attack, and it specifically impacts SharePoint, typically on-prem SharePoints at this point. This was for a patch that was available in March, and then it again became available in April. Impacted a number of industries. Both Saudi Arabia and Canadian authorities noticed in the month of May that these something called China Chopper was being installed onto these SharePoint servers, which ultimately allows them complete control of the system, upload, download files, file retrieval, deleting files, copying files, and so on and so forth. So pretty dangerous stuff, not a problem for SharePoint Online. So if you're on a SharePoint on-prem and want to move, we certainly have that capability to help. And last but not least, Office 365 is under attack. There was a major study done, I think this was done by Barracuda. They basically had found that 29% of the environments they looked at had compromised accounts. Oh no, that would never happen to me. Well, the fact is it's their study. They had several 100,000 mailboxes they looked at across many organizations, and they found that 29% of those organizations had at least one compromised account. I would say from our view of things, it's something similar. These creds, obviously the industry, they're either buying it, stealing it, or asking for it, and after it's been compromised, they're doing some things to hide their activities within your accounts too. So all of these things being said, this is why we came up with the security audit for Office 365, and you should be doing the activities that we're doing on behalf of some of our customers. So recap, Ransomware-Ready, we've got some solutions that match up with trying to fix what the city of Baltimore is going through. From a patching process perspective, we've got some solutions that match up pretty well with Intel, Cisco, and Microsoft's deficiencies or gaps they're pointing in patching processes, and similar with Office 365 being under attack. The Pulse Complete that is the underlying solution for all of these bits and pieces is essentially the capability to take your servers, workstations, infrastructure, and people and apply good process to it, right? Apply good process, including support, anti-malware management, patching, monitoring, training, and making sure that it's all kind of front-ended from a user perspective on our side so that you're aware of what's happening and what's happening to you when, so that we're running the environment with you in mind, but taking responsibility for it. So that's our Pulse Complete offering, and it's certainly something that our customers are taking advantage of. If you're not ready, for Pulse Complete, but definitely interested in kind of getting started on something, we offer some easy ways to kind of engage with us, whether it be 14-day trials of our Office 365 evaluation. See if you're indeed one of those 29% that probably has a problem. Doing some phishing tests and testing your users, doing some scans from external, seeing what your patching process looks like, or if you just want to go out for coffee and have a chat, we certainly can do that too. So we have events that we're looking forward to in June. It'll be an in-person event at Michael Jordan's with HP, and talking about Nimble and also how to, I'll call it SAN environment and the modern SAN. And we blog 2 or 3 times a week. Ironically, last couple that were posted are here. Benefits of outsourcing IT security services, right? How timely that we would have done something like that. And then how to use Office 365 applications, and certainly poke around our blog site for a lot of the information, deeper information about some of the things we talked about. So with that, that concludes this month in cybersecurity.